Video games have been around for a long time, and they've gone through quite a few distinct eras. You've got the arcade games, the start of home consoles, the crash of the industry and the rise of Nintendo, the console wars, the first steps into 3D, first steps into HD, then the modern era, which we're living in right now. This is a pretty rich history, one that's pretty cool to go back and experience for yourself. However, unlike movies, music, and literature, which are significantly easier to archive and modernize for future use on almost all smart devices or made available through libraries, video games require special hardware in order to run. You can't play an NES game on a Genesis, and you can't play an Xbox 360 game on a PS4. The issue this poses has to do with the preservation of games as a whole, and making them available for future generations to enjoy. I'm sure that a lot of you have experience with being interested in video games from the past, and since the early 2000s, I think game companies have been noticing this interest. We've gotten things like classic collections on modern consoles or classic consoles that allow for emulation of previously released games, which is pretty cool, but obviously they're unable to span the vast history of all games on their specified platform. This presents a problem for the future, as a lot of games are at risk of being lost or forgotten, with no real official way of playing or obtaining them. So why should you care? What's the big deal if you can't play the 1990s hit NES game Dirty Harry 20 years from now?
Go ahead. Make my day.
I think it comes down to the importance of media history and literacy. Sometimes studying our past helps us come up with better ideas for the present, like Breath of the Wild returning to the original Legend of Zelda's open-ended adventure style. Or we could use them as tools to teach what not to do in certain games, and learning what archaic systems are in place due to limitations at the time, like lives or loading screens. And if we deprive ourselves of these lessons, we could make bad decisions, or even make the same mistakes we made in the past. It's not just enough to preserve these games though. Urban Champion doesn't do anybody any good when it's stuck behind a glass case. We actually have to play it to see what a piece of shit it is. So the question becomes, how do we play games that are designed for specialized older systems without access to those systems? Backwards compatibility is really the simplest answer to this question. However, it comes with a few drawbacks. First of all, this isn't something that gamers can just count on. This has to be something that is specifically developed for the next system in a company's lineup, and many companies may not care about that as much as we do. For example, the PlayStation 3 was backwards compatible with PS1 and PS2 games, until it wasn't, where it only became backwards compatible with PS1 games. And then the following console, the PS4, wasn't backwards compatible with any of them. They axed all compatibility with previous systems, even saying, "They look ancient. Why would anyone want to play this?" Personally, I think this was just a way to get people to buy into their subscription service, PlayStation Now. Instead of getting to own all of your games, you got to play some PS3 and PS2 games over the internet in 2014. You can imagine how great that must have looked. Hey, this looks terrible. Why would anyone want to play this? Clearly, they learned their lesson with the move to PS5, letting you play your whole PS4 library right out of the box. Though, if that console didn't have any PS4 games, it wouldn't have any games at all, so that's sort of a moot point. Xbox was doing a little better in this regard, but for some stupid reason they decided that only a select number of titles would be available to play, and that still stands for the Xbox Series X. At least Sonic Unleashed is on that list. That game is 16 years too early. Nintendo, on the other hand, made the complete jump to handheld consoles, which is awesome, but it presents a problem with the practicality of backwards compatibility. Damn it. However, a lot of great past Nintendo games are already on the Switch, for better or for worse. Remasters and ports are the most lucrative way that a company makes money by preserving games. They make the game accessible to modern audiences with quality of life improvements, and old fans can replay the game without busting out an old system. It's a win for everybody, right? Sometimes. They can be really cool if done well, and some of these remasters have great price points for a really well done overhaul. And sometimes it's Skyward Sword HD. I love Skyward Sword. I'm glad it's available with accessible controls, in HD, at 60 frames per second, with quality of life improvements, but did it really need to be $60? I feel like general ports are cool though. If a game isn't available in any other form, I'd rather it be on a console than not. Plus, it allows for genuine improvements on the game that a backwards compatible version otherwise wouldn't be able to provide, even if it's at an extra price tag. Overall, I think they're positive, and I'm glad that companies recognize that people like older games. Ports and remasters really only exist to make up for the lack of backwards compatibility, but have their benefits in allowing new eyes to be on a game that may not have performed as well, or for general fixes to the game itself. Making systems that are backwards compatible or porting over games doesn't really fix everything though, because what happens when a game goes out of print, and it's impossible to find it anywhere except for the stupid ass prices online? First off, emulation is completely legal. You're allowed to emulate games, you're allowed to have an emulator, you're allowed to make emulators. It's completely allowed by law. What's legally dubious is how you obtain and use ROM files for out-of-print games, because even if a certain incredibly litigious and sometimes very stupid company is no longer selling a game, they'll come after you for it if you obtain it in the wrong way. I'm not here to police you about how you obtain video games or play them. Do whatever you want. It's already proven that cracking down on piracy does not decrease piracy, and making a service that's more convenient will dissuade pirates from pirating. Regardless if you agree with that sentiment or not, archiving game files online is the best way to make sure they're playable and accessible for the future, instead of rotting away in some collector's basement. I really dislike the current state of collecting games. Since about 2017, it's gone from pretty affordable and fun to stupid-ass rat race to see who can sell a copy of Mario 64 for the highest price. Games are meant to be played and enjoyed, not sit in a box in your warehouse until you find someone who doesn't know any better to come around and buy it. So, instead of being beholden to when companies think it's the best time for us to play old games, or when we are or aren't allowed to buy them, we should archive them so they're always available and always playable. A medium as unique as this deserves the level of respect and care as any other. Games are really cool, and I like them a lot, and if you clicked on this video, you probably like them a lot too. I think it's important to preserve history for future generations, so even if they don't enjoy games of the past, they're always there to dig through and discover. There are lessons to learn in what to do and not to do, and interesting ideas that may not have had their time to shine, and maybe it's time to give them another shot. Entire genres of games are in a renaissance because of the past, like Metroidvanias and roguelikes, taking inspiration from old games and putting new, unique elements into them. Also, because of preservation and because of our passion, games like Live Alive and Trials of Mana have gotten official translations and releases that seemed like they'd never happen. It's so cool to have access to all of these games that could have been lost forever, and that's only gonna keep happening if we all work together to make sure that we retain this history as well as we possibly can. And we do all of this so the hit video game Dirty Harry is still available years after we've all passed away from fucking Big Bomb or whatever.